Let's have a quick prayer. Holy God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I just talked to the youth up here about how people are always changing. But have you heard the opposite? Some people never change. Some people never change. It's often said sort of resentfully or wearily, like we just wish somebody would be different. We wish somebody would change, and they just never change. But the fact is that, yes, as I said to the youth, everybody changes. Everybody is always changing all the time, always growing, always at least having the world act upon them. And there may be tectonic plates moving within them to change, and we can't see it, but everybody's always in motion in this world. And I want to talk today mostly about that, about how people can change and how we interact with people who we want them to change, but they're not changing like we want them fast enough. But before I do that, a caveat. If you're in a relationship with somebody who's harming you or abusing you, whether it's physically or emotionally or verbally, get out. They're not going to change in any kind of timeline that's healthy for you. And we can't stay in relationships that are harmful to us. That's not love. If you're in an intimate relationship where somebody's harming you regularly, that's not love. And further, we really aren't loving that person by allowing them to beat up on us, whether it's verbally or emotionally or physically. And so if we can, and we're in that kind of relationship and we think, I know they can change, get to a safe distance and wish for them to change from a safe distance. And that's really what this sermon is about. How do we interact with people who we want to change when we are at a safe distance, when we are safe from whatever bad behavior they may be doing? How do we interact from there and hope for and wish for that change, whether it's a family member or a good friend, a loved one of any kind, or maybe even ourselves? Some of the things I'll say today are applicable to the ways we wish we could change ourselves. It gets a little more complicated, so I'm not going to focus on that specifically, but a lot of it is relevant. So yes, people do change all the time, but there's very little we know about that process. I'll say this, by the end of this sermon, you are not going to have any easy answers about any of this. So I'm sorry, I'll apologize in advance. Hopefully we'll have some more ideas, some theology, some language to think about how people change, but I'm not going to be like, oh, Pastor Tom told me if I do 1, 2, and 3, then my loved one's going to change and they're going to be all better. That's not going to happen. Because we don't know a lot of really important things about people changing. We don't know how they're going to change. Sometimes people get worse before they get better. There's somebody who's in our life who's just acting badly. They're not necessarily on the trajectory to get better all the time. And in fact, if you look at something like Alcoholics Anonymous and the disease of alcoholism, in that program, sometimes they talk about people needing to go out and hit rock bottom. They come into AA, they're like, I want to quit drinking, but it's clear that they're just sort of trying to defeat the disease on their own, with their own willpower, with their own strength. And AA is a spiritual program that says you're probably going to fail. If you really are an alcoholic, you're going to fail in that effort. And AA will say, look, go out and get drunk, get it out of your system. You need to hit rock bottom before you can really admit that you're powerless over this disease. So sometimes we don't know the how of the change. Sometimes it can go the other direction before it goes the direction we are hoping for. We don't know the why of change. Sometimes we wish people would change because they would be better parents to their children, or they would be better neighbors. And it may be that they have very different reasons in their heart for the change that they need to make. And we don't know the motivations of anybody's heart and soul. So we don't know why people change. And we don't know when. And that's the big one. We want it to be tomorrow. We want it to be soon. Get better. Stop being so mean. Get over your addiction today, tomorrow. And it could be a year. It could be 10 years. It could be 30 years. And a person can die never having changed in one way, but maybe they've changed in another way. I bring all this up because our story today is about somebody who changed in a very specific way, the Apostle Paul. His name is Saul in the story, but those names are basically interchangeable. We don't really need to go into why, but we're going to call him Paul. Paul was known as a violent persecutor of the church. He was a zealous Jewish leader who believed that people who thought Jesus was the Jewish Messiah were heretics and a threat to the Jewish faith and to the Jewish community, and he wanted to violently stop them from believing that Jesus was the Messiah. And so he even had authority from the high priest to go out and arrest Christians and bring them back for religious trial. Our passage today said he was breathing out threats and violence against the church. He was somebody who, what my daughter would call a try-hard. I didn't know this term until she got to high school. A try-hard was almost always a boy, always was a boy. I'm sure there's girls that can be try-hards too, equal opportunity for try-hards, right? A boy in gym class who tried really hard at every sport they did and wanted to be the best at every sport that they were doing in gym class. Like they're playing soccer or kickball or badminton, they're like trying 100%. And she's like, it's gym class, can you just relax and have fun? And of course, she was taller than almost every boy in her class and more athletic than most of them. And so she would come home and be like, yeah, I beat the tryhards today. And that gave her a lot of satisfaction. But a tryhard is somebody who's just like, I'm gonna be the best, and I'm gonna work really, really hard to be the best. Paul was a classic tryhard when it came to religion. He's like, I'm going to be the best Jewish person. I'm going to be a Pharisee. I'm going to be blameless under the law. I'm going to persecute these Christians and show how righteous I am. So he was a violent, arrogant, zealous tryhard. When he had this conversion experience, only one of those things changed. After the conversion, he was still a zealous, arrogant tryhard. But he was an arrogant, zealous tryhard for Jesus now. What changed in Paul in that conversion was his violence. He no longer wanted to enforce his views or his religious beliefs on people through force. After that conversion experience, he came to believe that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, and he started trying to convince people by the demonstration of God's Spirit through his life and by persuasive arguments that Jesus was the Messiah. And he dedicated, of course, because he was so zealous, he dedicated his life to convincing and persuading people nonviolently. That's what changed for him. And so what can we learn from Paul's story? That he had this amazing moment of clarity when Jesus appeared before him and said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he got it. Something clicked, and he decided that this was his Messiah, and he was no longer going to advocate for change through violence. Let's talk about what we can learn from that. First of all, when it comes to change, whether it's other people or even ourselves, our time is not the same as God's time. God's time and our time are not the same. Why couldn't Jesus have appeared to Paul earlier? Why couldn't Jesus have shown up to Paul and said, when he was just starting out in his persecution, why couldn't Jesus have shown up to Paul when it says Paul held the coats of the people who stoned the first Christian martyr to death? Why did God have to wait to this moment on this road to Damascus to intervene and call Paul to change? Because God's time and our time are not the same. We wish that Paul had changed earlier. I'm sure the people he persecuted wished he had changed earlier, and we don't understand why, but all we know is that God's time and our time are not the same. Our reasons for change and God's reasons for change are not the same. Again, we may want Paul to do it one way. We may have wanted him to change so that he could chill out may have wanted him to change so that he would not be prejudiced and continue in his prejudice against women, against gays and lesbians. He would make a statement about slavery and the immorality of slavery. He didn't do any of those things, and we don't know why, but God knows why. And God had some kind of plan for Paul that wasn't our plan. And it even says, it's complicated, it says in our passage today that Jesus says to Ananias, I have selected Paul to bring my message to the Gentiles, to kings, and to the Israelites. And I will show him how much he must suffer for my sake. What the heck is that all about? God has these reasons for moving in our lives in certain ways that we may, again, not understand, and we certainly can't understand it in what we see happening for other people. And God had that motivation to change Paul that we do not understand. And again, all we can do is say, we don't know. I served with a chaplain in Marin County, California, and there were a lot of Spanish speakers in Marin County. And this chaplain was a white guy. He didn't really know any Spanish at all, but he learned one phrase to say when he was dealing with somebody who'd been through a family tragedy, and he said, why did God let this happen? And he learned to say, no entendemos. We do not understand. And then the final thing we don't understand, God's time is not our time, God's reasons are not our reasons, is that there's some combination of our willpower and our desire to change and God's power to make us change. And there's some kind of mixture in there that we don't often understand, but we often err on the side of believing that we really do have all the power, that if we just try hard enough to make whatever change it is, then everything's going to be okay. But there are forces in our life, divine forces that we can't see beyond our control, that are required, our community, our habits, the stresses in our life, our jobs, all of these things are moving in our lives that all have to align sometimes for us to change. I know personally, I've struggled with weight gain and weight loss my whole life. I've gained and lost 40 pounds 4 or 5 times in my life. And I always lose it with some kind of crazy restrictive diet. I'm like, okay, I'm going to eat 1,200 calories every day. And there will be times when I get the motivation up, and for 3 months I can do that. That was always the joke. When I became vegan, Sasha's like, we'll see. I'll give it 3 months. It's been 6 years, so that one's stuck. But the weight loss thing, it's like you lose it a bunch and then gain it back. And this is a common thing that people go through. It's like, I'm going to lose it and I'm going to try really hard. And then we get to the point we want and we just kind of gain it all back. There's some combination between our willpower and God's power that we don't quite understand. And that back and forth where we just try really hard without God's help is not ultimately healthy for us at all. How can we cooperate then with the power of God that's working in our lives to help us to grow, to nurture us, to cause us to change? Not in a way where we take control, but we are cooperating with God's Spirit for something better. And so that brings us to what then do we do? I told you I wouldn't have any easy answers for you at the end of this, how to make your loved one change, how to make people in your life change, your coworker change, yourself change, and I don't. But here's some ideas, at least, that might help us interact with the people in our lives that we want to change a little bit better. And the first goes back to the caveat at the beginning: have good boundaries. We are not meant to be doormats for people. God never wants us to be a doormat for somebody. God never wants us to be a punching bag for somebody. We need to, if we want to love people and try to help people to change, we need to do it from a safe distance. We don't need to be anybody's punching bag. We can't necessarily change somebody by throwing our whole selves into making that person different. We have to know what we can do and what we cannot do. And we can only do what we can do. having good boundaries may be the best thing that we can do, in fact, to help people become better. To say, look, I can't make you better. You know, it's like when cabin pressure drops and the oxygen masks fall, you got to put your own oxygen mask on before helping others. You know, I've got to make sure that I'm okay and safe, and I will help you in any way I can, but I've got to have these boundaries. Second, acceptance. Acceptance of people exactly who they are. That means acceptance of people when they are failures, when they're completely drunk, when they are strung out on drugs, when they will not get up from the TV to get out and get a job, when they are depressed. Acceptance completely for who they are. And then the third thing is the opposite side of that coin, and it's what I talked about on Easter Sunday, to see people for what they can be, to have that resurrection of people, resurrection vision, to see people from what they can be and not what they are. And to hold those things together is a challenge. Complete acceptance of a person who's self-destructive, hurting others, and treating them for what they can be and for the potential that they have. To do that without judgment and without love. It's not easy, but that's the path that we are called to walk. We live in this world where, you know, Paul says that I do the things that I don't want to do. You know, what I want to do, I don't do, and what I do is exactly what I don't want to do. So even he is conflicted and trying to figure out how to change himself. We're all trying to figure out how to be better people. We have people in our lives who are hurting and self-destructive, and we want to make them better. And walking that path is all about having those boundaries, accepting people for who they are, and believing and treating them for what they can be. Amen.